Good morning and welcome to the fifth virtual North American Student Congress of the North American Educational Initiatives Foundation. NAEIF has been running pioneering leadership programs for over 26 years. And we believe that these congresses are perhaps one of the best programs we have been doing because it involves student engagement across the continent. We ask all the speakers to keep in mind that you have 8 minutes for your presentations. We welcome your participation, your comments, and your dialogue. Kindly use a stopwatch to keep attentive to the time schedule because we have many speakers participating. Today, we will begin with Ismail Ahmad Ansari.
Yes, hello. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ismail Ahmed
Please
Ansari.
introduce yourself and then present your presentation. Thank you.
All right. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ismail Ahmed Ansari, and I'm a student at Meadowville Secondary High School. And I will be presenting my presentation on the Declaration of Independence.
And could you, as we can tell them that you are an American, Canadian, or Mexican student?
I am a Canadian student.
Good.
All right. So, should I share my screen if that's
Please.
possible? Okay. I don't think it's letting me. Yeah. It's not letting me share my screen.
Just a moment. Let's see if our webmaster can help you. Fernando, are you able to help this presentation connect?
Yes, of course. Good morning, Ismail. Uh, Now you can share. You are allowed to share. If you go to the Zoom tools, there is a share option.
The what tools?
Share.
There, that here now, you will see that is chat, react, and then is share. It's like a little rectangle.
It's after React, it's showing Q&A. It's not showing share.
Now, can you try again, please?
It's still not showing up. Sorry, I rejoined. Yeah, it's still not showing up.
Okay. Did you send your presentation by mail?
Yeah, I sent my presentation by mail.
Okay, let
How
me look
about
for it and I can present for you.
All right, thank you. That'd be great.
Fernando? May I suggest that he leave the presentation and come back in? Will that work?
Yes.
Okay. Ismail, why don't you go out and we will resend the invitation.
Yep. All right, that works.
And we will proceed with um, Helen Hackett, who is a student at Brigham Young University. Welcome, Helen.
Hello. It's so good to be here today. So Yeah, I live in East Tennessee, and I'm actually going to start Brigham Young University after serving a full-time mission for my church for the next 2 years. But I'm really excited to talk about my perspective from a critical analysis of the Declaration of Independence. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. Imperfect people, timeless ideals, reconciling ideals in the Declaration of Independence with reality. See if I can move this. Okay, so what are these ideals? In 1776, as the Continental Congress decided action was needed and separation was imminent from Great Britain, a team of statesmen, leaders, and writers drafted the Declaration of Independence to announce revolutionary action necessary against Britain. The main part of this document was a list of grievances, but it also contained ideals new to the world inspired by writers like Montesquieu, Locke, and Rousseau. They declared that we have certain rights that are endowed by a creator, like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that governments are instituted for the good of people, and it's our right to alter and abolish it. And to us these days who have heard these statements and ideals growing up, it seems like a given. But for these people at this time, it was revolutionary. Across the world, people were in shock that we thought that these founders thought that everyone had equal rights, and that was a future we could achieve. Now, the founding fathers were not perfect. Sometimes we would look at their words and say, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If that was true, why did they own slaves? Thomas Jefferson himself, all the founding fathers owned slaves, but Thomas Jefferson who wrote All Men Are Created Equal, said that slaves were a necessary evil. He believed them to be morally wrong, but depended on their profit. So at that time, they put their goals over the ideals they had written about. And this was common among the founding fathers, that they had these great ideas that were shocking the world, but still in their own selves, it wasn't consistent. They weren't perfect. So they took their ideals from the Declaration of Independence and created their government by the people and for the people. The first government of the United States was not the Constitution, but the Articles of Confederation. As we know, it was not successful. There were problems like they couldn't tax, they had trouble raising an army, and couldn't deal with conflicts. And so what did the founding fathers do? They looked to their Declaration of Independence that says, when a government becomes destructive, or doesn't work like it's supposed to do, you institute a new government. So they scrapped the Articles of Confederation and bravely decided to write the Constitution of the United States, which protects our rights, continues the ideals of the Declaration, and still influences our society in an enormous way. Now, as the United States kept growing, people noticed that things were happening that were wrong. Slavery was wrong. This was not the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness that had been promised. Frederick Douglass said in his speech, "What to the slave is your 4th of July?" He said, "What to the slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him, more than other days of the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is a victim." He looked at his ideals in the Declaration of Independence and saw that they were not applying to him. And the government and society was not as the founding fathers had imagined it yet. And so the civil rights movement went forth, and people looked at their ideals and said, hey, this is what we were promised as a nation. We need to change it. Just like the women's rights movement too. Elizabeth Cady Stanton quoted the Declaration in her speech, saying, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal, endowed with certain unalienable rights," and the rest. She built her entire platform around the fact that she had been promised these rights in the Constitution, and she was going to look towards that to make her world a better place. And so we can see over time, objectively good changes have happened to society as people look to our declaration and see the things we're promised, and they notice society isn't perfect and we can make it better. We've advanced civil rights and rights for women, all because we've had such a strong document to look to. Now, as we look at American society today, across the political spectrum, we might disagree on exactly what is perfect or imperfect of our world today. So I tried to pick some pictures that different sides might say are problems. Someone might say our government has become too destructive, and we need to, in the Declaration's words, abolish or alter it. Others think that certain unalienable rights have been taken away or infringed upon. But no matter exactly our political standing or what we believe, we know there is a direction we can move forward, inspired by the Declaration. There's still room to change. So as an American, we might look at these ideals and say, we're not perfect, but we're doing a pretty good job. And then we look at the rest of the world and see that there are places where it's much worse. Human rights problems like extreme poverty, discrimination, dictatorship, and unfair imprisonment are a sad reality of the world we live in. And although we can look at our declaration and say, hey, we did something great, we inspired democracy in other places, we have these good ideals, they haven't penetrated all areas of the world. And so, what does this mean for us today? Society isn't perfect. We can all agree on that. As a nation and as a world, there are things we need to work on. But we can look to the Declaration for ideals that will always hold true, that we can agree upon, like people have rights. And although we might not have all of those rights now, we know it's possible to work forward because the people who wrote these weren't perfect and they knew the world wasn't perfect either. But we can see that we've been moving forward in a good direction and that major change has happened because people were able to look to these strong ideals. And so may we progress and unite in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that's all I have for today.
No, thank you very much. And now we have 2 or 3 minutes for the participants in the Congress to ask questions, to dialogue with Helen. And I hope that we take advantage of that. Please go ahead. Please, before you ask a question, identify yourself and your university, your country.
Good morning. I have one question. My name is Gustavo is Luis Molina. I am from Mexico. I am a student to the University Aurora University in Mexico. I had one question, Helen. How the Constitution of the United States help to the people black for your liberty. Why? Because this disfortunately actually in the United States there one very racist with the black people, Mexican people, and for the minorities. What do you think to the Constitution? How to change the life to these people to the liberty? For example, to the one Mexican is illegal in the United States. Do you think these people have to the liberty? For example, for go to the store and for vote is very important. The people vote, but actually in this government don't exist the Mexican people, black people. What do you think to the Constitution can to change to the liberty to this minority in your country? Thank you very much.
Okay, so what I think is that while I can't say exactly what the government should be or shouldn't be doing about this, is that if people living in the United States think that they don't have the rights that were promised them in the Constitution or in the Declaration of Independence, they have the right to look at those and do something about it. That there are ways built into our government where we can say, this isn't right, here's what I'm going to do. And my kind of whole point today is that these conversations happen because we have the ideals to look to because we have this framework to say, hey, this is not okay. We have the why, and then the how is where government and activism comes in. Thank you for your question.
Mina has a question. Thank you, Luis, for your question. And Luis, we will be having a Congress about the Constitution in the near future. Okay?
Okay.
Mina has a question.
Hello, everyone. I'm a student from Lyons Township High School in the United States, and I was wondering, do you think that the document is still relevant today?
I think it's definitely relevant today. I actually feel pretty strongly about that. While there are certain parts that might not feel relevant because they wrote in archaic vocabulary, or maybe because we focus more on the Constitution because it's our actual government, I think the thought behind it has been perpetrated through every action of the government, whether for better or worse, and that it's just always our standard to compare to, and that even if we aren't always talking about it or thinking of it, it still influences our society because it's what built it. Thank you.
Do we have other questions to ask to Helen? So now we will go to Esmail Jamal, who is a student in Canada, as he has said. Esmail, do you have the ability to share your presentation?
Yeah, I now have the ability to share my document. Yeah. I will do so now. Sorry, just give me a moment. Yep, here we go. All right. Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, depending on where you're joining from. My name is Ismail Ahmed Ansari, and I'm a student of Meadowvale Secondary High School in Canada, Ontario, Mississauga. I'm very delightful to be speaking with all of you here today across the entirety of North America, and I'm very honored to be here as part of the virtual North American Student Congress. Today, I want to talk about the American Declaration of Independence and specifically the tension between what it declared and what it delivered. The promise. Let's start with the words themselves. In 1776, a group of American colonists wrote one of the most powerful sentences in political history. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. For 1776, this was extraordinary. Monarchy was the norm. Kings and queens ruled by supposed divine right. The idea, sorry, the idea Sorry about that. The idea that all people are created equal, that rights belong to every person not because the government grants them, but because they're inherent, was completely radical at the time. Now, the Declaration rested on three powerful pillars: equality, being that all people are born with equal worth, not equal wealth, not equal circumstance, but equal dignity; natural rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are not privileges given by a ruler, but they belong to every human being; and consent of the governed. The government gets its authority from the people, and if it fails them, the people have the right to change it. These ideals were genuinely revolutionary at the time, and they inspired democratic movements across the world, including eventually my own country, Canada. Now, we move on to the reality. This is where history demands honesty. Because the same document that declared all men are created equal was signed by men who enslaved other human beings. Let that land for a moment. That document that declared that all men are created equal was signed by men who enslaved other human beings. The Declaration had four deep contradictions I want to name. First, being that slavery was not abolished. Approximately 40% of the Declaration signers were enslavers. The institution of slavery continued in the United States for nearly 90 more years after these words were written. That is not a footnote. That is a fundamental contradiction. Second, women were excluded. All men are created equal was applied quite literally. Women could not vote, could not own property freely, could not participate in government. That exclusion lasted well over a century. Third, indigenous peoples were described in the Declaration itself as, and I quote, merciless Indian savages. Their lands were taken, their rights were ignored. The very document that proclaimed equality dismissed an entire continent of peoples. Fourth, the people was a very narrow category. Consent of the governed applied to white, male, property owning colonists, and everyone else, enslaved people, women, indigenous peoples, the poor, were completely outside of the circle. These contradictions were not accidental oversights, they were deliberate, and they caused immense suffering for generations. A Canadian lens. So, what do I, as a Canadian grade 9 student, make of all this? Canada chose a very different path. We did not break from Britain through revolution. In 1867, we became a nation through the British North America Act, through negotiation and not war. Later in 1982, our Charter of Rights and Freedoms was enshrined in our Constitution. Now, I want to be clear about this. Canada is not perfect at all. Our history with Indigenous peoples, our residential school system, our systemic racism, these are serious gaps and serious failures that we must continue to reckon with. Canada has its own gap between declared values and lived reality. But from where I stand, I can look at the Declaration with both respect and honest eyes. The Declaration's ideals inspired Canada's own democratic values, and the idea that people have rights that governments must respect did not stay south of the border. At the same time, both our countries share a common challenge. Making words on paper mean something real for everyone, not just for the privileged, not just for the majority, but for everyone living under that flag. Now, the ongoing work is, I have hope that the story did not just stop in 1776, and that's what happened. Because the Declaration, even with its contradictions, created a standard. And that standard became a weapon in the hands of those who were excluded. Abolitionists used the Declaration's words to argue that slavery was a betrayal of America's own founding promise. Suffragettes used to argue that all men are created equal must mean all people. Civil rights leaders used it to demand that America finally live up to its creed. Now, let's take a look at the timeline. 1865, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, 89 years after 1776. 1920, women gained the right to vote, 144 years later. And in 1964, the Civil Rights Act, nearly 2 centuries after independence. Progress happened, but none of it was automatic. It required courage, sacrifice, and generation after generation of people saying, "You said these words, now live by them." And that work is not finished, not in the United States and not in Canada either. Conclusion. So let me close with this. The American Declaration of Independence was a remarkable document. Its ideals were real, they were powerful, and they changed the world. But its authors did not fully live those ideals. The gap between the Declaration's words and the reality experienced by enslaved people, by women, by indigenous peoples, that gap was enormous and it was harmful. This must be acknowledged. What I believe as a student of history and as a Canadian is that these ideals matter because even when they're written hypocritically, they give future generations something to hold their society accountable to. Contradictions matter too, because we cannot build a more just world if we only celebrate the beautiful words and ignore the painful realities. And the ongoing work matters the most, because democracy is not a destination. It is a practice, a daily generational commitment to close the gap between what we say and who we actually are. The Declaration of Independence asked the question in 1776 that every generation since has had to answer for themselves. Do we actually believe these words? I believe we must. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, we're getting some really good presentations. I think you would agree. And Ishmael, I love that closing line. The
Oh,
Declaration is not, what did you say? The
uh, the Declaration of Independence asked the question in 1776 that
no,
every
but
generation since has had to
that's
answer.
also good. But also you said the Declaration is not um a rival point, or what did you say? I'll have to think about it. You had a very good comment. And I think all of you guys have a very good future as speakers and leaders. Do we have questions for Ishmael? How do I say your name correctly?
Ismail. Ismail is fine. Yeah.
So, what questions we have for him from a Canadian perspective? Any questions?
I have a
Helen,
question. Okay, so
thank
you
you, Helen.
mentioned you talked a lot about how they had really good ideas, but they weren't executed quite perfectly or didn't match up with what they say. Do you think as we continue building the future that that's going to be the case for all documents and ideas that will never quite meet our own expectations, or is there a better way to do that?
That's a really good question. Yeah, I do feel that this could pour out depending on how people really go with things. So if we involve more of these other communities as we go on in our governments, giving them a chance to say something, a chance to add something into these rights and these acts, it's better than just having, one person decide, oh, we should do this rather than that. Because if we have one person say this, then other people would either be offended or it won't involve those other people. So we should have everyone's opinions pour into, an act or a right or a law before we really move on with it.
Excellent. So now may we please go to Eric Jarquin Torres, a student at the University of St. Thomas here in Houston, where I'm located. Eric,
Good morning, everybody. My name is Eric. I do apologize for my voice in advance and for any background noise. I live in a Mexican household. I am an American student and I am a university student and I attend the University of St. Thomas here in Houston. I will now share my screen. So, the Declaration of Independence, balancing ideals with reality. So, I like to start off with a little narrative that I wrote, and it goes a little bit like this. Imagine you live in a society where justice is dictated by a single individual. And if you decided to speak about or speak up about injustice, you were ignored, you were mocked. This is the sad reality that we're currently facing as a society. And whether you decide to watch the news or not, every day our rights are being increasingly pressed, whether it be by peers, whether it be for our own political views, or whether it be at school. And whether you are a Nepo baby or if you come from Section 8, I think it's important to remember that everybody has the right to be treated equally and that everybody has the right for life, liberty, and the endless pursuit of happiness, which was written in the Declaration of Independence. But this simply isn't the case. The Declaration of Independence, as we heard from our two previous speakers, was written in 1776. And yet, in today's society, thousands of immigrants, if not millions, who come to the US are now faced with the constant fear and anxiety of either being removed or their rights being revoked. They all once dreamed of being free, but are now faced with the harsh reality of being treated unequally. And You might ask yourself, this is quite opposite of what the founding fathers stood for. I mean, the Declaration of Independence is, like I previously mentioned, set upon freedom, yet it doesn't seem to apply to everyone. Aren't all men created equal? Aren't all women, all of all and all genders, aren't all people created equal? I mean, in our society today, the African Americans and Hispanics are the ones who are mostly attacked. And we cannot go without mentioning Native Americans. They have been attacked and persecuted thousands of years because of colonialism. And this has now developed fear towards the authorities and our governments. We once viewed these authorities as our protectors and as people who we could trust, that would protect us. But now we just simply run and refuse to accept their service. So, with that in mind, we must ask ourselves, why do people like Alex Preddy, George Floyd, and Liam Conejo had to have their lives threatened? Alex Preddy, who was an ICU nurse and deeply cared for his patients, his life was taken away from him. George Floyd, a father of 5 children and provider of them, also had his life taken away from him. And Liam Conejo, who was just 5 years old, was nearly removed from the country simply for his immigration status. All of these individuals were treated with the same injustice that was once motivation for a new life. And with that in mind, I would like to mention my personal point of view about how the Declaration of Independence is a powerful reminder that when the government fails to fulfill its duties, it is our responsibility and it is our right to amend what is a given to us. We have to remember that we can never be sold, that our hard work is not worth our month's rent. Our worth is also not dependent on the amount of effort we decide to put out into society. It is simply unjust and unethical for someone to make 10 times my salary and not have to worry about when their next meal will be. Yet, this is the harsh reality that thousands of families are facing every day. Why can't everybody have the luxury of a warm meal and a shelter? As a Estonian, I can attest to seeing a lot of families out in the streets selling flower petals. And this also goes on to the veterans who once served this great country. They are now found in streets. And while the number has decreased, it is still very prominent to see a lot of veterans homeless and without a shelter and warm food. They once stood with the same honor as our founding fathers while serving our country. Yet now they have been forgotten. And we should also remember that our government can sometimes be distrustful. And we, even as civilians, can be distrustful. Sometimes we advocate for things that simply not a lot of people agree with. And that has to do with like our political perspective, right? If some people are Democratic, then they have certain views. And if some people are Republican, then they have certain views. But that simply leads us on a different path. It doesn't lead us to what our founding fathers once thought. We were once promised the power to decide what was best for our country, and that simply isn't the case. And then we see this with the Electoral College. The Electoral College is now dependent on those who don't even represent us, but their self-interest. It is good to also consider how the citizens have also forgotten about the influence that they can have on their government. Every 2 years, we get to elect our state representatives for them to speak about the issues we face as a state. But due to the division of the parties, like I previously mentioned, it distracts us from our ultimate goal, which is basically harmony. So, in conclusion, I would like to say that the Declaration of Independence stands and its ideals are clearly written that all are created equal and that we should have the security of our rights to not be revoked, and that the government should derive its power and authority from the permission of the people it rules. So, next time you decide to go voting, remember the difference you can make. Your voice matters as much as the rest of your peers. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time.
Excellent presentation, Eric. Thank you very much. So, what questions do we have for Eric?
Um, I have a I have a question.
Thank you,
Yes.
Michelle. Welcome to the meeting.
Thank you. I'm Michelle Bueno. I'm a Mexican student. I currently live in Guadalajara, Mexico. And sorry in advance if I make like any mistakes in the language. Um, why would you consider that it's like the main thing that you as Americans can do, and that we as Mexicans that we see like all the situation from the outside? Like, from all the people that are being like deported or just that are coming back here to Mexico. And we're trying to welcome them. We're trying to, make them feel like this is their home and this has never really, um yeah. So what would you say that's the main thing that we and you can do in our positions?
I think in the position of like a Mexican, it's good to remember that most of these, I guess, Mexican American individuals who were born in the United States, they did not learn any Spanish, and kind of just remembering that like it's hard for them to adjust to a new country with new laws and
Yeah.
to a different language. It's kind of difficult to interact, and they're kind of lost in the country as well. Um, just keeping in mind that language barrier, and even as us Americans or Hispanic people or African Americans, I think taking in immigrants is really important, and just treating them equally. I think it's the main priority as Americans, whether they might be aided more than a regular civilian here. I think everybody deserves a chance for the same opportunities and dreams. I think everybody deserves the right to an education, to food, to a shelter. And if those basic human needs are revoked for them, then it's impossible to thrive and to be able to go out into the workforce and achieve what one person dreams of. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you,
you for the
both of
question.
you. And Mina Ribik, would you like to, did I say your name correctly?
Yeah.
Please introduce yourself, and would you please begin your presentation? Thank you, Eric.
Yes. Hello everyone. My name is Mina Ribik, and I'm from the United States. I'm a high schooler at Lyons Township High School, and I'm gonna be a senior this year. I'm just gonna screen share real quick. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. 1 second. Um, 1 second. Okay. So, hello everyone. I'll be talking about the Declaration of Independence, balancing ideals with reality. So, first, I want to talk about the question. As an American student with the traditional historical perspective, what do I think about the American Declaration of Independence and its balancing ideals with reality? Well, I'll first tell you my answer. I think that the Declaration of Independence exemplifies American core ideals. It is flexible to set precedents for future fights for equality, but the United States has had major struggles with balancing ideals with the reality. So it lacks actual execution to provide equality for all of its citizens. And why this question matters is it matters because it helps people connect how the ideals that were presented by the founding fathers actually was implemented in societal reality of the world. Now, first, I want to talk about the core values. Not all the core values that are presented, but one of the major ones. First, we have the natural rights, rights that are inherent for all, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Consent of the governed, which is government power comes from the people, not a monarchy. That is also included in popular sovereignty. And all men are created equal. Equality is given to everyone, regardless of status, background, and wealth. Therefore, these values are crucial because they establish the foundation for democracy, protect individual freedoms, and justify the establishment of a government that serves its people rather than oppressing them. Now, although these core values provide equality for all, throughout history, society heavily interpreted the document based on their racial and political views rather than providing these core values and rights to all of its people. Let me elaborate. I want to bring you guys back to the antebellum period. It roughly started between 1815, that's what historians said, and it ended right before the Civil War in 1861. So what happened during that time? Slavery and racial hierarchy. Limited political rights for minorities like women, African Americans, Native Americans, and etc. And Native Americans' removal and suppression. So while the Declaration of Independence proclaimed all men are created equal, the United States quickly became a nation built on slavery, a system that legally defined enslaved people as property rather than citizens. This created a legal and moral divide. The laws upheld slavery in the South, even if the Declaration's principles were invoked in abolition and reform movements. So there were abolitionists and reform movements, but society heavily interpreted the Declaration as all men are created equal for mostly white citizens and white males. But there were some reform and abolitionist movements. It just wasn't that prominent because of how high the society thought of men are created equal for only white citizens, and as well for Native American removal and suppression. One of the examples is the Indian Removal Act of 1830. It was signed by President Andrew Jackson and authorized the federal government to negotiate the relocation of Native American tribes from their ancestral lands in the eastern United States to territories in the West Mississippi. And this kind of showed that equality for all men was not true because they forced Native Americans to leave their lands so white settlers can come in and settle into their lands. So, therefore, the gaps between the ideals and practice. The antebellum period did not follow the Declaration of Independence because the nation's growth and legal framework were built on compromises that preserved slavery, traditional and racial values, while the Declaration's ideals were selectively applied, as I stated. This contradiction between the nation's founding principles and its evolving reality created the sectional tensions that eventually also led to the Civil War. Now, it wasn't all bad. There were also some good societal uses of the document, like abolitionists, which they fought for abolishing slavery. Abraham Lincoln and his Emancipation Proclamation and abolishment of slavery women's suffrage and civil rights movements and activists like MLK, Malcolm X, and like one of the movements like March to Washington. These were all good ways of the document, and they used the document and especially the ideals of equality, natural rights, and government by consent to push the nation closer to justice and equality. Like abolitionists were among the first to invoke the Declaration claim that all men are created equal to argue for the removal of slavery in America. As I said, one of the most prominent activists were Abraham Lincoln that reframed the Civil War as a struggle to fulfill the Declaration's promise for equality and the advancements of society through the document. This exemplifies that the Declaration of Independence set a moral foundation for abolitionists, women's suffrage movements, and civil rights movements in order to push for greater equality among society. They used the principles to confront and demand that the country lives up to its own standards. Now, there were also some critiques to the Declaration. One of the most enduring critiques is that the Declaration language, as I stated, all men are created equal, did not extend to women or enslaved people. As well, historians and political thinkers have also debated the document's meaning and application. Some argue that the Charter of Democracy, while others see it as a proclamatory statement of independence rather than a detailed political philosophy. Modern interpretations were very widely, from seeing it as a defense of natural rights to viewing it as a call for self-determination. Therefore, critics argued that since the Declaration of Independence was written in a period where racial and gender inequalities was accepted, the self-interpretation document allowed for politicians to use it for their own purposes. So therefore, when viewed from a historical lens, the document reflected and was used more for political purposes rather than for equality among all people in the earlier times. So to also bring it all back, ideals and reality. The Declaration is both inspiring and imperfect, expressing universal ideas that the nation did not yet live up to throughout history. A traditional perspective were the ideals as like genuine, even if they were unrealized at the time. And the tension between ideals and reality drives American reform, shaped movements from abolition to civil rights. So some might say the Declaration, in a sense, it didn't completely live up to the expectations of equality, but throughout society, generations have used the document to advance our society. And today, people in the United States still use the document philosophically to argue for racial justice, gender equality, LGBTQ rights, indigenous sovereignty, and voting rights. To elaborate, the Voting Rights Act, a cornerstone for U.S. civil rights, has been significantly weakened. And in April 2026, the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 to dismantle a key provision that protected communities of color from unfair gerrymandering, effectively allowing politicians to dilute their voting power. This decision has spurred urgent calls for groups because the Supreme Court basically allowed stronger gerrymandering, which didn't protect people's rights. And as well, for indigenous sovereignty, many Native Americans are still fighting for their sovereignty and their lands in order to protect their language, governance system, and treaty rights. So, as well, this document is also used as guidance in court through interpretation, and it's implemented in primary schools curriculum. And lastly, to wrap it all up, in short, the Declaration of Independence is both a moral compass and a call to action. It sets the standard for a free society, but its true measure is the ongoing effort to meet that standard. Thank you.
Wonderful. Mina, thank you very much. Very, very incisive comments, and I'm looking forward to hearing the questions from the group.
Hey,
Please
Mina.
go ahead.
So my name's Konstantinos. I'm from South Carolina. I don't have a question, but I do actually kind of have like a comment on your presentation. For one, you did an amazing job. And then also, one of the things that I find really interesting about the Indian Removal Act was the fact that, in particular, the Cherokee Nation in Georgia actually won a substantial case in the Supreme Court against the Indian Removal Act. But um, he Andrew Jackson, he just ignored it. He chose to
Yeah.
abuse his power and still seize their land and cleanse them. So it's a great travesty. I'm
Yeah.
glad that you mentioned that.
Yes, I actually did learn about that this year. And yeah, even if the government and the Supreme Court like overruled the decision for the Indian Removal Act, the just like the traditional perspective and like society's perspective on the Native Americans completely like overruled that rule and they just did it anyway, which is not it's not good. But thank you. Thank you for bringing that up.
Nina, just like the other people, I just love these PowerPoints, and
Thank you.
you very everyone is very talented on these PowerPoints. Um, do we have other comments? Yes, Luis Gustavo. You may speak in Spanish, no problem.
Puedo, muchas gracias. Quiero hacer una pregunta a Mina. I have one question for Mina. I'm sorry for my English. I am not very nervous.
No, no, no,
Eh,
no se preocupa. ¿Ok?
gracias. ¿Cómo ven los jóvenes en los en los Estados Unidos?
Are you saying how are the like kids my age now? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, how do they see the document?
Oh, how
Young
they see the
people.
document? Yes. Well, I think they see it more open-minded. Because now we're learning in school's curriculum, we're learning about the Declaration of Independence and how it's there to provide equality for all men and like the core values. But as well, we're learning also how throughout history, the government and the people, they did not fully execute like the ideals. And we're learning like how people mistreated minorities, especially minorities throughout history. Um, Especially like and also how people fought. So I think how we see it, we still see it as like a positive document. Like it also was a core like ideal for many like movements, like the women's movement, like abolitionist movement. It paved the way as like evidence for advancements in those movements. So we do see it as a positive, but we also see how society has viewed it as um, very limited to specific people. But I think in America, students would still view it as a positive, like a good thing to have, because it provides evidence to make sure that all men are equal.
So, Mina, I'm going to translate that. Do you need me? Do you want me to translate that, Luis?
Yes.
Ok. ¿Cómo lo ven los jóvenes en los Estados Unidos, este documento? En general lo ven de una manera positiva, pero tienen también enfrente de ellos la evidencia negativa de que en muchos aspectos no lo realizaron, pero tuvieron que esperar a través de los años la realización de los ideales. Y todavía hay gente, grupos que están peleando por su realización plena. ¿Es that okay, Luis?
Pregunta, cuál es la visión de los jóvenes, tanto los migrantes mexicanos? Porque actualmente se nos ha atacado bastante a mis compatriotas en los Estados Unidos cuando son personas que por la situación social de mi país han tenido que ser parte de la cultura de los Estados Unidos por la migración. ¿Cómo perciben los jóvenes y los jóvenes que están en la universidad a los migrantes mexicanos como una minoría fuerte? Muchas gracias.
Entonces, preguntas, ¿cómo perciben
Ajá,
los
jóvenes hacia
universitarios
los
aquí
migrantes mexicanos.
hacia
Ujú.
los migrantes? Okay, he wants to know, Mina, how do university students in the United States perceive, how do they view the immigrants in the United States?
Um, I haven't been to many universities, but I'll speak from like my friends who are at universities and like my experience in my high school. I'm as well an immigrant. I moved 7 years ago, so I moved when I was 10, and I feel like based on my experience, I think I had a very positive experience. I'm very grateful, like my school was very welcoming. We also have like learning centers to adjust people to like learn English and also like people around you, they're very welcoming. I know a lot of people when I first came here, they wanted to know my traditions, like how was it like living in another country. So I feel like if you're talking about a community perspective, I think many people here in America are very welcoming, especially because we have many cultures and many traditions. So you can find your people as well. Like I found my community as well from people in my country, but I also found a place in community here with many other of my friends. So I feel the community is very welcoming, and I think we perceive them well, although there is some like I think there is some like political conflict and like stuff going on in the news right now. Based on just like my experience in living here, I think it is a very welcoming community.
Mina, where did your family come from?
We all came from Serbia, from Europe.
Very
Yes.
interesting. Entonces, Luis, ella llegó con su familia de Serbia y su experiencia personal ha sido bastante bien. Ha tenido ha recibido muchas felicitaciones y muchos programas de bienvenido. Pero depende de cada cultura si puede entrar bien. Depende de cada persona si puede entrar bien. Aunque los migrantes sí tienen muchos retos para realizar su vida aquí. ¿Ok, Luis?
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Mina.
Okay. Nicholas, is Amira Malek in the meeting? Very good. Nicholas, would you please introduce yourself again? And I'm sorry, Konstantinos.
Hey, are you wanting me to go?
Yes, you know what? It's now 12 o'clock. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to have a 25-minute break for lunch, and we will then resume the activity at 12:27. Okay, I hope everybody will rejoin with us at 12:27. Thank you. Initiatives Foundation. Welcome back to the 5th Virtual North American Student Congress sponsored by the North American Educational Initiatives Foundation. I would like to make reference to the fact that I am advertising for my college, from which I graduated many moons ago. As you can see, I have the college tie and the college pin for Dartmouth College. This is my hat. And I'm making special reference to my college because the president of the college, President Baylock, has been doing many activities along the lines of what we are doing today with their program called Dartmouth Dialogues, encouraging students and graduates and adults to learn how to have civic discourse, to be able to speak about topics and to be able to listen to the other about topics of the day. So I would like to know if, let's see here, if we can resume the meeting with Nicholas. Michelle Bueno, is she back in the meeting? Konstantinos, why don't you begin your
Yeah, I'm back.
presentation? Oh, good. Michelle, why don't you go ahead with your presentation? Welcome, introduce yourself to us once again.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and share my screen. Mm, okay. Can you see my screen?
Not yet. Okay, very good.
Okay. Okay. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yes, okay. I'm Michelle Bueno. I'm a university student in Mexico. I'm currently majoring in nutrition, to be a dietitian, and the title of my presentation would be An Unfinished Promise, the Declaration of Independence through a Mexican Critical Perspective. So, why was the American Declaration of Independence so revolutionary? So, the main purpose of this was to justify the separation of the 13 colonies from Great Britain. And the Declaration of Independence was written in the 1776 to justify the separation, but it became much more than a political document. It introduced revolutionary principles that changed the traditional idea that power came from kings rather than from people, which is the idea that we had also in Mexico and in all of America. According to to this declaration, every person possesses certain natural rights that cannot legitimately be taken away. Government exists to protect those rights, and their authority comes from the consent of the people. And it also states that if a government fails to fulfill that purpose, citizens have the right to alter or abolish it if they want. And it stated the fact that all men are created equal. This declaration inspired revolutions, and the importance extended beyond the United States. It served as proof that colonial populations could successfully challenge the imperial powers and establish governments based on popular sovereignty rather than in divine monarchy. So actually in Mexico, these ideas resonated with the people, dissatisfied with the rigid caste system imposed by the Spanish crown. And although Mexico independence movement had its own causes and leaders, the American example demonstrated that self-government was actually possible. But one interesting difference is that Mexican leaders such as Miguel Hidalgo and José María Morelos advocated for the abolition of slavery and sought to dismantle the colonial caste system from the beginning. So we can see that it was actually different. In America, they had the Black people were actually sent for the British crown to be slaves. That's why they stayed there. And but in Mexico, they didn't really have like outside slaves. They used the people that were already there, and they thought that their value came from the caste system. So basically, they divided people up how pure they were or they considered they were. So first they were the Spanish ones that came from Spain and they were born in Spain, and there was the ones that their parents were from Spain, but they were born in Mexico, and from there on. If these ideas were so revolutionary and influential, why do I describe the Declaration as an unfinished promise? Well, one of the most influential modern interpretations of American history is the 1619 Project, created by the journalist Nicole Hannah Jones. It emphasizes the contradiction between the ideals expressed in the Declaration and the existence of slavery. Although the Declaration proclaimed that all men are created equal, millions of African Americans remain excluded from those principles. And another important perspective comes from the historian Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, an indigenous people history of the United States. And she argues that indigenous people experience the nation's expansion very differently from the traditional historical narrative. And I believe that the United States was destined to expand across the continent helped justify the territorial growth, but this expansion often came at the expense of indigenous nations whose sovereignty and rights were frequently disregarded. And from this perspective, we could argue that the ideals proclaimed in the Declaration were not equally available for everyone. At this point, an important question emerged. If the declaration excluded so many people, should we reject its ideas altogether? Well, I would argue no. From my point of view, democracy is an ongoing promise, and the sociologist Robert Bella argued that nations most constantly renew their commitment to their founding ideas, and no society perfectly embodies its principles, and that democracies are never a finished project. And in his view, the answer to historical failures is not national self-worship, but honest reflection and willingness to pursue justice more faithfully. Mexico's history also demonstrates that democratic ideas are not realized overnight. Independent leaders sought to dismantle the colonial caste system and abolish slavery, but many inequalities persisted, such as the indigenous communities that were continued to experience exclusion, and efforts to build an unified nation identity often privilege Spanish over indigenous languages and tradition, contributing to the decline of many native languages and cultures that we had in Mexico. And like in the United States, Mexico's democracy development has involved both progress and contradictions. This reminds us that democracy is not a finished achievement, but an ongoing process from reform and renewal. So yeah, I don't see the Declaration of Independence as a perfect document, but I see it as an unfinished promise because its ideals were revolutionary, but their application was incomplete. But yes, Yet those same ideals provided future generations with the language and principles necessary to challenge injustice and expand the meaning of equality. So yeah, and I would like to end with this phrase: the pursuit of a more perfect democracy comes not by ignoring our contradictions, but by confronting them through civil discourse. Thank you.
Michelle, that was, look at all those references. Thank you very much, Michelle.
Thank you.
I'd like to tell you, my wife is Mexican, and
Okay.
her family is from Guadalajara, and that's where they live, and we often go there. And three of my nephews and a niece went to ITESO. Actually,
Oh, okay.
two of them have graduated. One just graduated, and one is finishing up there. And my sister-in-law and her husband both went to ITESO a number of
Oh,
years
yeah.
ago, and it's a very highly regarded university in the Jesuit system.
Yeah.
So, do we have questions for Michelle, who looked at this whole question from the Mexican point of view? Excellent job.
Thank you.
I was wondering, do you think that the history, like the democratic history of Mexico is similar to the democratic history of the United States?
I would say so. I think that democracy in Mexico is a bit different though. Also like the system of voting that comes from many years before is really different in the US than it is in Mexico. And I think one of the main things that we can see as a difference that still reflects in modern days is that the United States really like divided like political parties in like two. And in Mexico we don't. We normally you have like three or four parties that state like different things. So yeah, I would say they're similar in the sense that we all have like both of the countries, we have like independent states that respond to like a all to a government. But yeah, I would say like more political and socially talking, I think they're very different.
Any other questions?
Yes, Michelle. I will to try to speak English, okay?
O si quieres
For
en
respect to
español,
my
no te
colleague.
preocupes.
Okay, okay, Michelle. ¿Qué opinas tú de la Constitución de los Estados Unidos y mexicanos? Pues, bueno, porque tú sabes que los Estados Unidos y México tenemos 3.400 kilómetros de frontera y en 1848 nuestro país cambió, pues, geopolíticamente. ¿Tú piensas que ha existido una igualdad, hablando de la Constitución de los Estados Unidos y de México, hacia los grupos nativos americanos como el Cherokee, el piel roja, que desafortunadamente dentro de la Constitución de los Estados Unidos no se habla nada de ellos? ¿Qué opinas de eso? Y igual en nuestro país no hay una igualdad hacia los pueblos originarios de México.
Ujú.
¿Qué opinas tú de eso? Porque realmente si estamos hablando de una constitución y de los derechos de la igualdad,
So,
Ujú.
so
Eh,
Luis is asking about the treatment of the indigenous both in Mexico and the United States, and how are they comparable, right, Michelle?
yeah, I would try to respond in English and in Spanish. Yo creo que es muy importante de seguir, o sea, seguir hablando de esto y que haya diferentes movimientos, diferentes iniciativas para que no se pierdan justamente pues este tipo de cosas. Desconozco en qué estado o ciudad vivas, Luis, pero yo creo que es muy importante, sobre todo como mexicanos, seguir apoyando este tipo de iniciativas, o sea, seguir apoyando las artesanías de personas o grupos indígenas, a lo mejor aprender qué palabras que usamos habitualmente vienen de esas lenguas, eh, o también participar en voluntariados, cosas así. Por ejemplo, mi universidad tiene una iniciativa que es así como para aprender un poco de estas lenguas, aprender que el español que hablamos viene de ese origen y todo eso. Y acerca de la Constitución de Estados Unidos y de aquí, no estoy muy empapada en el tema, la verdad. Te podría hablar más del tema social que yo veo, que es que, bueno, en Estados Unidos, eh, pues fue fundado un poco más, con esta diversidad cultural, con muchos grupos, no solo indígenas, sino que sí, latinos, asiáticos, africanos, o sea, de todas partes del mundo. Eh, entonces, sí creo que hay como que más prevalencia de ese lado de Estados Unidos que en México, que como que nos hemos más como homogeneiciado todos, eh, que ya ni siquiera podemos identificar como que, esta persona viene de familia de, no sé, papás, tíos indígenas, ya es como que ya todos estamos un poco más mezclados. Entonces, sí, yo siento que es importante seguir hablando de esto y no ignorarlo para que no se pierda como esta historia y esta cultura que tenemos en el país. In English, I would argue that America was really founded with this like principles of international community. I think that there's community in of all parts of the world, from all parts of the world in America. So I think that with all the things that are happening right now, I'm not really like so familiar with the topic of the Constitution and all that stuff, but I think that they should really give more rights and they should be more taken in account because the United States was found under this like multicultural background. And here in Mexico, I think it's important to keep talking about this, like the indigenous groups, keep supporting them and learn that parts of our language came from those groups and keep talking about them, keep supporting them. And yeah, maybe even learn a little bit of their language. So when a person comes to you that doesn't speak Spanish, you will be able to communicate with them.
Michelle y Luis, tenemos un aspecto de una utilidad en tu programa de traducir y
Okay.
dice captions. Everybody in the program, we have a captions function from English to Spanish and from Spanish to English. Okay? ¿Me entienden, Luis? Si tenemos algo para dar su discurso en español y va a dar captions. ¿Cómo se dice captions?
Um,
Palabras.
Como traductor,
yeah,
Michelle, how would you say captions?
Subtítulos.
Subtítulos. Muy bien. ¿Quién dijo eso? Who helped me on that one? Eric?
I think Miss
Fernando.
Piotr.
Fernando. Very good, Fernando. Okay, Fernando's our webmaster, the invisible webmaster. So the next talk I would like to go to is to Konstantinos. Go ahead, please, and introduce yourself and your topic.
Hey, so my name is Konstantinos Ioannidis. I am from South Carolina, and I'm currently a rising senior this year at Arizona State University. I do all of my coursework remotely, so I'm still in South Carolina. But my presentation today, which I am going to share very quickly, let's see. Maybe. Let's see. Sorry. Okay. My presentation for today, can everybody see it?
Yes.
Okay, amazing. So my presentation today is going to be about the Declaration of Independence at 250 years, and analyzing the actual state of the revolution, where we are today, and kind of the consequences of government overreach and how really a lot of the founders' vision has actually been betrayed, in my opinion. So let's go ahead to our next page. Just as a brief overview about the United States, we're a very young country. So, I mean, just we've only actually been in existence from the time of the revolution for about 250 years, exactly this year. The Roman Republic lasted 482 years. The final two dynasties of the late Chinese Empire spanned over 544. The French monarchy from the time of the first dynasty, the first formation of the state, until the final emperor, Napoleon III, lasted 1100 years. So America is a very young nation or a fledgling nation. And with that, I feel like we are kind of going through a period of turmoil where America and Americans are trying to kind of figure out what the Declaration actually means for the modern era. Um, and that's where we'll lead into kind of the preamble of the Constitution. So we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their creator with these certain unalienable rights, these being life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I think it's really good to look at the preamble and kind of like the Constitution as a whole. I also think it's really good to look specifically into the historical context and the wordage of the Constitution itself, which we'll dive into on the next page. So, why did America seek independence from Great Britain? There's a lot of reasons. Specifically, these come from the preamble. So, for cutting off our trade with all other parts of the world, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, effectively rendering the military independent and superior to civil pursuit, and then erecting a multitude of offices, new offices, sending swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their sustenance. He has also refused laws for the necessary public good. The great irony is that at 250, we're kind of seeing all of this happening again. So go on to my next page. We're seeing a spike of state-sponsored violence. Granted, there has actually been state-sponsored violence since the foundation of the nation. Indians, for example, Native Americans being purged from their lands, ethnically cleansed. My cat is here. The suppression of free speech, with like the Kent State massacre, the protests recently against ICE, where there have been violent crackdowns, unconstitutional foreign adventurism, the military state where we're constantly at war abroad. And what I like to kind of attribute towards, rather than the death from one tyrant, death from 1,000 tyrants. Tyrants at the local level in governance, tyrants in policing, tyrants in the executive, people in the legislative branch that are usurping power from the legislative to the executive branch. We're really seeing a breakdown of all of these different mechanisms which the founders sought to establish in order to protect the division of power and in turn us as Americans. In particular, one thing that I'd like to hone in on, one similarity with the unconstitutional foreign adventurism. A lot of people don't really talk about it, but in lead up to the American Revolution, it was largely spurred on by Britain's foreign adventurism. Britain kept getting into wars that they could not afford to maintain. The Seven Years' War, which was in part also at the same time as the French and Indian War, it was really just all the same war, a global war. It could very well be kind of alluded to as the first Great War. Um, the Seven Years' War essentially bankrupted the British monarchy. They went into severe, severe debt. This led to the government really having to levy very, very financially ruinous taxes and fees on the colonies, including the 13 colonies. Uh, and then obviously the American colonists were not very pleased with this, and there's more and more protests, and it cascaded. But in large part, the revolution was spurred on by unjust war. We've really seen this march towards war since the end of World War II. Steadily but surely, the executive branch has usurped power from the Constitution, which specifically delegated war power to the legislative branch. The entire U.S. population, through representation, is supposed to vote on whether we actually go to war or not. It's not constitutional for the president to just say, we're going to go to war. We're going to go to Iran. We're going to go to Libya. We're going to go to Iraq. That's not how the Constitution was founded. The founders were very, very particular about making sure that war power lied with the legislative because they saw they knew what happened to them. The king went on a spending spree with all of these conquests, and then the people, had to foot the bill, which led to the revolution. So that in particular is a very, very, very big erosion of American civil liberties. You have to think about it. We spend billions and hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars on military adventurism, and it's eroding the quality of life here because we're increasing debt, increasing inflation, and all of these other metrics that lead to our own misery. So that in particular is a very pressing issue in America. And that's where I would argue the solution itself is actually very present. The Constitution itself and the Founding Fathers' vision for the nation, while flawed, their execution was flawed. Their vision, I would actually argue, is very, very relevant to the modern day. Government of any kind corrupts. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. The only sure mechanism to protect people is to minimize government, because government is a leviathan. It spreads and it usurps power from the people, no matter where it is. This has been seen with the fall of the Roman Republic. This was seen largely with the rise of the Imperial Japanese state and the erosion of their constitutional democracy. All across history, all nations that have fallen into dictatorship largely follow the same pattern that we find ourselves stuck in. Power is eroded, it erodes civil liberties, it erodes domestic stability, and then people turn against the ideals that actually protected them in the first place in derived from the Constitution. And we really need to see an embracement of the founders' original vision in order to protect civil liberty. And with that, That's my presentation for today. I hope you all enjoyed.
Thank you, Konstantinos. I'm sorry we lost some of your presentation at the end.
Oh no. Where did you stop hearing me?
Can you hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Can you hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Oh.
So, thank you very much. So now we are going to ask Luis if, don't worry about it, Konstantinos. Luis, ¿estás listo para tu presentación? Y puedes escoger el botón de traducir al inglés. Very good. Sani, are you still in the meeting?
Yeah, I am.
Would you please begin your presentation first? I welcome Sani to the meeting. Please introduce yourself, and we're eager to hear your presentation.
Okay. Hi everyone. So my name is Sonny Page. I'm from California. And I'll be giving a presentation on the Declaration of Independence, America's Promise and Contradiction from a critical historical perspective. I'm just gonna share my screen. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So this is the Declaration of Independence, America's Promise and America's Contradiction. So this is the statement, all people are created equal should not only be a phrase from history. It should be visible in law, justice, opportunity, safety, education, and human dignity. To me, this statement is really the heart of this entire presentation, because the phrase all people are created equal should not only be something that we kind of memorize from history, but you should be able to see it actually in practice. So what this topic really means is this topic is essentially asking us to balance America's ideals with American reality. So the Declaration speaks boldly about equality, but America in 1776 was built with deep exclusions. So a critical perspective asks us to hold truths at once. The ideals were extremely powerful, but the reality and the way that they were executed was very unequal. It also asks us to question who was included in the word equal, who was left out, and who had rights only in language, but not really in daily life. To me, the most important question is not only what the Declaration really meant, but it's about how are we actually willing to make it mean right now, and how are we willing to execute what it actually means. So why was the Declaration really written? The Declaration of Independence was adopted on July 4th of 1776. It explained why the 13 colonies wanted independence from Great Britain. It listed grievances against King George III and framed British rule as a violation of colonial rights. Thomas Jefferson was the main writer, but the Continental Congress approved the final document. The Declaration was more than a historical breakup letter from Britain. It was founding argument against the unjust of power and what absolute power could really do. It argued that government should protect people's rights and not rule over them without consent. Its most radical idea was that people can challenge a government when powerful becomes abusive or unjust, and that's kind of the core or founding principles of the democracy. So the ideals of the Declaration. The Declaration names life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as basic rights. These words became central to our American identity, kind of what we live by. At its best, the Declaration suggests that rights do not come from wealth, race, status, government, or inherited power. It says human beings have value simply just because they're human. That is why its language became bigger than the men who wrote it. Even though the founders failed to apply equality fairly at that time, later generations used those same words to demand justice. So now I want to take a second to talk about the reality of these words. So the Declaration, as we know, it spoke about equality, but then in the new nation, people were not treated equally at all. Enslaved Black people were denied freedom, family protection, legal personhood, and basic human rights. Women were denied equal political voice and legal independence in many parts of their lives. Indigenous communities were treated as obstacles to expansion and for expansion instead of a sovereign nation with rights. So even though equality was written in the Independence as an universal idea, but practiced as privilege for a narrow group. The document gave America a moral vocabulary, but the country's reality showed how far it really still had to go. So I kind of want to take a second to talk about like prominent examples. So this is Frederick Douglass, The Freedom for Whom. Frederick Douglass exposed the moral contradiction at the heart of American freedom. In his speech, What to the Slave is the 4th of July, he asked what Independence Day meant to people who were still enslaved. For many white Americans, July 4th represented pride, it represented independence, but for enslaved people, it exposed hypocrisy. Douglass did not reject the idea of freedom. He wanted freedom, but he also wanted people to understand that freedom should be applied to all. It didn't just have to be applied to white people. If white people were able to be granted freedom, then Independence Day should be applicable to people who were enslaved and people of color at that time as well. And now let's go into kind of women's rights. So another example is the Declaration of Sentiments in 1848. At Seneca Falls, women's rights activists modeled the Declaration of Sentiments after the Declaration of Independence. By writing that all men and women are created equal, they exposed the gender limits of America's founding promise. They were not asked for a brand new standard. They were demanding access to the standard America already claimed to believe in. So this meant like voting rights or any rights at that time, because at that time, women weren't even allowed to, kind of leave a house or start a family on their own or own land or, be part of the community because they couldn't even vote. So this shows how excluded groups use America's own words to challenge America's exclusions. Just to briefly go over Indigenous people. So Indigenous people were at the baseline cost of this independence. For colonists, independence meant freedom from British rule, but for many Indigenous communities, American independence meant intensified expansion, land loss, broken treaties, violence, and attacks on native sovereignty. The Declaration itself reflects harmful colonial attitudes towards Indigenous people, so we have to ask whose freedom was really being celebrated, and whose suffering was being ignored, because I think based off of all of this, we can tell that at that time, it was really white people and nationalists whose freedom was being celebrated. And there were so many people and groups of communities that were just left out from what the Declaration of Independence had to say. So even though the Declaration didn't exactly create equal society, it gave abolitionists use its ideals to expose slavery as a betrayal of American freedom. Women's rights activists used its language to challenge gender exclusion. Civil rights leaders use it to promise to fight segregation, racism, and second-class citizenship, especially in the civil rights movement. So really, even though it has very strong wording, its power comes from the people who chose to see its flaws and then understood that there's also a means in its vocabulary for a positive way of executing it. So the Declaration became revolutionary not because of the way that was written and who wrote it, because of the generations that kept expanding who was allowed to belong, in quotes. So my personal take on this is that, to me, the Declaration is more than just a historical document. It's kind of a standard that every generation really inherits. When I hear the term all people are created equal, for me, I don't think equality should come with certain exceptions that we see right now, where it's your gender, it's your race, it's your color, it's your ethnicity, it's your social status, it's your sexuality. People should not have a price tag on their lives. And I think that's a very strong statement that I like to live by, and that's something that I hope to create changes in. So when we hear the term all people are created equal, we really should believe that it's all people that are created equal. We're human, we share the same blood, and that should really be it. So the Declaration gives us the language of equality, but language only matters when people are brave enough to act on it. There's been a couple very recent cases where we can see, examples of this inequality. George Floyd being a very, very prominent example, and it kind of started the whole Black Lives Matter movement. And then in very recent times, what came to light was the Epstein cases, and that just shows like how people in power can abuse their place in power and easily manipulate people that were victims. They can manipulate law enforcement. And so when we hear the term all people are created equal, is it really all people are created equal, or are we giving people in power so much more privilege and the ability to get away with heinous crimes that they really shouldn't even be getting away with? So although it set a standard, I think we still have a lot of work to really execute it to its full advantage. So our generation, I feel like, has to define this equality. We've seen a lot of amazing work that's been done, but I think we still have a little bit of more work to do. So democracy only works when people participate through voting, organizing, protesting, speaking up, and holding institutions accountable. There's this term called institutional power. I think many of you guys might be aware of it, but when people do grassroots organizing, they come together, they, develop a voice. That's when you're actually able to tell people in power that there needs to be some sort of change that has to be done, and that comes from top, that comes from the institution, and then it goes down. It's really not a perfect process, but it shows that collective voices can pressure powerful systems. So overall, basically, the Declaration gave America its highest promise, but as we can see, American history shows how unfinished it really has been. Equality was declared, but the country wasn't really willing to practice it in full motion. It spoke of liberty while millions were enslaved, excluded, displaced, or denied a political voice. But I think the most powerful thing that it gave future generations a standard to kind of live by. Like, this is the goal and this is where we want to be. And if it's written by our founding fathers, then it really can happen. It gives us so much hope. And I think that's where the grounding kernel of truth lies. So the Declaration did not make America equal. It gave future generations the words to demand equality, and now it's our responsibility to decide how real those words can become. And that's really my final thought on this. These were just kind of the sources that I used for my presentation. And thank you for listening. If you guys have any questions, I'd love to answer.
Thank you so much, Sandy. That was a very vivid presentation.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. From sunny California.
Yeah.
Here it's pouring here. All right. What questions do we have for this young lady? Very good. Let us next go to um, Ms. Bandai. How do I say your first name, Gia?
Gia Bande is my full name.
Bandai. Would you please introduce yourself to the group and begin your presentation?
All right, hello everyone. My name is Gia Bande. I am a citizen of the United States and I am based in Hartford, Connecticut. Let me share my screen. Let's see, I think it would be here. All right. So can everyone see my screen?
Just a second. Yes.
All right. So as you guys can see over here, my presentation is like the critical, more leaning towards constitutional but historical perspective on ideals versus reality with the Declaration of Independence. The table of contents, which will be the overviews of where and what I'm going to go over today, the history and thesis, ideals versus execution, historical criticism and influence, and its effect on today. Context of the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence is known as a document that established independence from the British on July 4th, 1776. As a high school student that was born and is currently residing in the United States, the Declaration of Independence expressed revolutionary ideas for its time, but given societal standards and mentality of the people, the execution of those principles ended up showing contradictions. Its historical significance lies in both aspirations and limitations. What key factors led to this verdict? Restrictive laws such as the Sugar Act, Townshend Act, and the Stamp Act issued by the British led to a dispute amongst modern-day American people. These legal bypasses led to the famous quote, "No taxation without representation." This is also why the Boston Tea Party occurred. Americans argue that getting taxed by parliamentary government is against their constitutional rights. These disputes and battles led to the Continental Congress, in which the Declaration of Independence was declared unofficial. Oh, pardon. Okay. Yeah. Human rights that were mentioned in the Declaration of Independence. Life, which is your existence, is valid and protected from unlawful harm. Liberty, freedom in which it wouldn't theoretically harm others. Pursue happiness, which are the right of autonomy towards success of one's enjoyment. And then
One moment. Your thing is not loading.
Oh, it isn't?
Are other people able to see her presentation? I saw it before. People need people can't see the presentation. Can you reload it?
Yeah, give me a moment. Okay, let's see if this works now. All right. Can you guys see
Good.
now?
Good.
All right. So I'll just get back to the pursue happiness part. So the pursue happiness is the rights of autonomy towards successful enjoyment. Then the political aspect of it is one, the consent of the government, which means governmental power is not absolute and must make people under it feel equal and protected. And then we citizens have the right to abolish and rebuild. If a government doesn't abide by the established laws that they signed and declared on, the majority or the people have the right to abolish the government and reestablish a new government in which will help the people. All men are created equal, said Thomas Jefferson plus Congress. Here's the truth. Were all men actually created equal under the law? Well, issues such as slavery, despite the law, slavery was still legal. Women's rights, as they were considered as property of a man. Indigenous people who had no citizenship under this document and were forced to move and migrate to different places within the United States. And voting rights were severely limited to the 1%. What is a nation? A nation refers to a state that emphasizes the collective identity of the people, rather than just political or physical territory. How come the United States failed to do that under the Declaration of Independence? We, the people, thought all men were created equal. Here are multiple perspectives. Slaves, people who worked under a white society, didn't have any human rights in their favor, and even so, it led to the 3/5 compromise in the South. Women were also considered as property, and basic rights for a woman didn't occur until after the women's suffrage movement in the 1930s. Caucasian men, aka the common rich, white men had rights in their favor entirely. They were the basis of what we call again the 1%. Usage of the Declaration. Civil rights under Abraham Lincoln when the Civil War occurred regarding the rights of a human between North and South. The Declaration of Independence was used to support the minority. And regarding his Union address in 1860, he states over here that the founding fathers did not want the government to interfere with slavery when it already existed, but they absolutely wanted to restrict it from expanding to new Western territories. And his famous line is, "Let us have faith that right makes might, and in that faith, let us to the end dare to do our duty as we understand it." Frederick Douglass questioned the Declaration of Independence and proved that it wasn't protecting everyone's liberty, as he was a refugee from slavery. He says here, "Fellow citizens, I am not wanting in respect for the fathers of this republic. The signers of the Declaration of Independence were brave men. They were great men, too, great enough to give frame to a great age. It does not often happen to a nation to raise, at one time, such a number of truly great men. The point from which I am compelled to view them is not, certainly, the most favorable, and yet I cannot contemplate their great deeds with less than admiration. They were statesmen, patriots, and heroes, and for the good they did, and for the principles that they contended for, I will unite you to honor their memory." However, he also follows it up by saying, "Fellow citizens, pardon me, allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I, or those I represent, to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? And am I, therefore, called upon to bring our humble offering to the national altar and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence to us?" Here, Susan B. Anthony, who was the woman that wrote her speech on women's right to vote, she uses the preamble of the United States Constitution, which also established the rights written on the Declaration of Independence. She first states the preamble of the federal Constitution. "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." She then follows it up by saying, "It was we, the people, not we, the white male citizens, nor yet we, the male citizens, but we, the whole people, who formed the Union. And we formed it not to give the blessings of liberty, but to secure them, not to the half of ourselves and the half of our posterity, but for the whole people, women as well as men. And it is a downright mockery to talk to women of their enjoyment of their blessings of liberty, while they are denied the use of the only means of securing them provided by this democratic Republican government, the ballot." Then Martin Luther King Jr., when Dr. King protested for the rights of people of color and women, he references Abraham Lincoln's Union address, Mahatma Gandhi, and the Declaration of Independence. He says here, "We can never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of our highways and the hotels of our cities. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their adulthood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating 'for whites only.' We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negroes in Mississippi cannot vote and the Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. I say to you today, my friends, even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still." The verdict of today. Are these still prevailing issues? Yes. To this day, there are still cases in which one's rights are violated under the United States Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. For example, mass incarceration ever since Trump joined the United States government for his second term, alongside with his abuse of power when it comes to ICE and deporting citizens without valid reason, which then goes against the Sixth Amendment, the 14th Amendment, pretty much the entire Bill of Rights, including the Lincolnian Amendments. And then on top of that, also emphasis on the 9th and 10th Amendment, which talk about the implied powers. And also, given the war with Iran, Iraq, and all these other nations, yes, he did not get approval from Congress. That itself is unconstitutional. And then for the people in society that say, Oh, well, the immigrants are the ones at fault. Well, then why is your president over here being just as unconstitutional as these alleged immigrants who allegedly did something wrong when proven they're actually innocent? Remember, there is always a right and a will to protest under the First Amendment. Remember, nobody is above the law. Thank you.
GI, that was a very powerful, you have a very powerful voice,
Thank you.
especially, you say your assertions with the same power that you say your own quotations. Very powerful. Congratulations. Do we have questions or comments for Ms. Banda?
May I?
Sergio, welcome to the meeting and please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I am Sergio Villegas Torton. I'm from Mexico City. And in order to make a question, sorry, I will hear about what Gia Bandai think about the concept of universal rights. I will start this with a quotation from George Orwell that says that someone's are more equal than others.
Are you talking about when Winston Churchill said that quote?
Oh, at his book, Rebellion of that Farm Revelation.
George Orwell. Yes.
George Orwell, yeah.
Do you remember the quotation, Gia, of all men are created equal, but some more equal than others?
Oh, yeah, the second half. Yeah, I do recall that part.
Yeah.
Do you want to comment on that?
So the first part, like the things with that full quote itself, I do agree with the all men are created equal because yes, we are all human, right? And then under the United Nations, we are all recognized as human globally. But as of the some or more equal to others, it's either like if I were to put in modern days, and I'm trying to make this as nonpartisan despite my very partisan side of perspective, like I do not agree with the second side. However, some people may interpret that as of like our capitalist economy, in which people would probably talk about the money and the economical status of the people. However, like as of the Declaration of Independence, and if like regarding of morals, like the first part is what should be relevant to today's society, and the second one should be less relevant. Hopefully that answers like my perspective upon that full quote.
I would like to add a second part of this. And how do you think we can achieve that equality vision in a libertarian or capitalist economy?
So, the capitalist economy, from what I know of, I mean, I'm only a high school student, there's always so much I know. But I mean, the capitalist economy is made to like make sure that people work for what they earn. But the thing is, our government ourselves, like in this nation, for some reason, our government cannot execute the part where everyone has adequate resources because they rely solely on the you must work hard on it. But the thing is, like, there's some people that can create stuff out of nothing, but then there's some people who don't have the inability to. So that's where the inequality and injustice comes from my perception. And I mean, in order to find equality, it's like mainly in this day and age with the Trump administration, I think like the only way we kind of have to do is like through protests in a very constitutional manner. And then, even if it means we have to overthrow the government, well, it's in our God-given right to do so.
Thank you.
Very, very good. Thank you for the question and the answer. Our next talk will be by Fatima Rasa, who is in Michigan. And can you begin, Fatima?
Yes, I can begin.
Thank you, everybody, during this meeting for keeping their talks to 8 minutes. Thank you very much.
Can you guys see my screen? Okay. Okay, hello guys. So my name is Fatima Raza, and I'm a current student, a current freshman at the University of Michigan Dearborn. And basically we're gonna be talking about balancing like the ideals with reality, like over the Declaration of Independence. Okay, so a little, what is the Declaration of the Independence? When we look back to ground ourselves, let's look at what the Declaration actually is. It was formally adopted on like July 4th, 1776, and it officially served political ties with the Great Britain. But like if we talk practically, it served the two distinct purposes. First, its perfect purpose was like a philosophical blueprint, which outlines the fundamental belief that all people possesses the rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And then secondly, it's like a legal breakup letter. It lists the long detailed series of like the grievance against like King George and all. So if we talk about the blueprints versus execution, especially over like the main point that all men are created equal, there's like a massive gap between it. A traditional, which is like the perfect creed, traditional historic perspective doesn't deny the severe moral shortcomings of a founding era, but the real genuineness of the American experiment is that the ideals transcended the human limitations of their authors. So when they write down the creed that all men are created equal as an unalienable truth, the founders accidentally trapped the nation inside a permanent moral contract. It wasn't a passive snapshot of 1776, but it was a self-correcting mechanism that set a standard, forcing every single generation to actively reform itself. And then the radical experiment in liberty. So the radical step of 1776 was a major impact towards this, and it was like a big step moment to get to where we are today. This was an incredible radical step for its first time. And as the historian, as I stated, Bradley over here, highlights the revolutionary nature of this text. Rather than filing standard colonial complaints or begging for better treatment within the empire, the writers broke entirely from the global norm of monarchy, and they passed national sovereignty directly upon the natural laws of God and nature. This foundation established the groundbreaking idea that governments do not grant rights, they are merely instituted to secure rights that already nature exists. Government legitimately comes purely from the bottom up and not top down. And then the American proposition. So we're living in a world of active civic project. In the book, We Hold These Truths by Reverend John Courtney, I could be saying his name wrong, he introduces a concept called the American proposition, which he argues that the Declaration is not a dusty historic museum piece to just look at, but it's more instead, it's a living and active civic project, which we as people today are still living in it, whether we don't see it or not. But it's more that we must be constantly tested, fought for, and proven truth by each generation. And as we can see, like as people stated, the previous like speakers, like George Floyd and the Epstein, so we are technically living in these moments. And balancing our ideals with reality is an active, generational responsibility. And it wasn't a battle that we won in 1776, but it's an ongoing test for national character. And then the weapon of constitutional progress. So there's three like kind of main points we want to talk about. Because it's a living project, future generations have historically used the Declaration as a powerful weapon for progress, turning the founders' own words back on establishment. So first, in 1852, Frederick Douglass didn't seek to burn the Declaration down, but instead he praised its principles as a saving principle, quote unquote, and used them to expose the brutal contradiction of slavery and demanding America to live up to its literal text. And then in Seneca Fall, 1848, which was a big moment, especially for the women, Elizabeth Cady Stanton perfectly modeled the Declaration of Sentiments at Seneca Falls on the 1776 text to successfully weaponize the language of equality for women voting rights, which we obviously know is a very big deal, and that's the reason why a lot of us women are able to vote now. And then one of like the more like I guess closer to today's date, and I feel like a lot of us learn in school is Martin Luther King. And in 1963, he famously referred the Declaration as a promissory note, and it's a check written to like every American that the nation was finally being forced to cash. And then an inherited torch of justice. So obviously we approach the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of 2026. And we might see this as, wow, it's been like so many years, but like as previous said, we are probably like the youngest nation. And today, the passion of today's generation for justice, system accountability, and civil rights is highly relevant, especially with young speakers speaking out. And Gen Z's basically our generation drives to eliminate social inequality isn't a radical break from American history, but it's actually the absolute fulfillment of the 1776 blueprint. When the youth demand accountability, they are participating in the exact self-correcting cycle the founders set in motion, and they are demanding that our current reality finally matches our founding ideals, whether this is speaking at like politician events or like even online, we create like big impact with social media. And then I just want to give like a line of ideological evolution. So if we trace back to this line, we can see how like quote unquote the torch is passed down. So it starts in 1776 with the foundational ideal of natural rights put on a paper as a global experiment, and it evolves in 1863 with Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, which reframed the Civil War as a dedication to the proposition of equality. And then it moves down to 1963, where the civil rights movement demanded systematical legal protection based on the original promise. And finally, in 2026, it lands with us, the new generation. A new generation must use that exact same moral framework to champion civil disclosure, accountability, and equity. And then just for like the ending, I want to state that like America's greatest strength isn't that it started perfect, but it's that it gave us the right to demand it to become better. And the promise of 1776 was a moral contract, and our generation is here to collect. So let's stop looking at the Declaration as like a monument of our past and start using it as a blueprint for our future. Thank you.
Fatima, that was wonderful. Thank you very much. And I would like to ask, there are questions for Fatima? Comments? Yes, Ms. Pandey.
Well, I mean, it's not really a question, but I really liked how you said that we should utilize the documents that we have, like the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, to enhance our future. Because that's like really correlating with how we Gen Z think. And I really liked how you said it in that way.
Thank you.
Do we have other comments or questions for Fatima? So I would like to ask, Luis, does your sound work? O sí, sí puedes escuchar, pero no puedes platicar. Ay, qué pena. All right, we're going to continue with Smayan Rede. Smayan, please introduce yourself to the group.
Hello everyone. I'm Smayan Reddy. I'm from the United States and I am a freshman at Lambert High School. And today I'll be giving a presentation on accessibility of knowledge, specifically in research. So let's see if I can you guys see my screen? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so then I'll get started. So when the Declaration of Independence was drafted, it's said equality for all men, which in technical terms did not include women, did not include African Americans or people of other races, and kind of led to this situation that we have in the modern day, which is still a form of segregation. So we need to focus on accessibility because people need accessibility to these resources to actually move upwards in society and have equal access to the things that they were allowed to have access to in the original Declaration of Independence. So in 1776, the Declaration promised that everyone gets these three things: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But in 1776, all of that belonged to only the wealthy, elite white people. And Jefferson, who even wrote the Declaration of Independence, enslaved over 600 people. And so this document was essentially like the biggest contradiction of its time because it promised equal access. It promised equal access to knowledge and research for everyone, yet it concentrated that only in the wealthy, elite people. And then people that have a lower socioeconomic status did not have access and were left, out with no resources. So I want to now talk about the research gap because research is an important part of society. Research is the creation or establishment of new knowledge. It's looking at existing things, formulating your own opinion, bringing a new insight into the world. And the thing is, research has for so long been limited to very little countries. If you see the map on the screen, it shows it's a cartogram and it shows the shape of countries based on the level of development and research impact they have. Look at Africa, like it's so skinny, and look at South America, and look at the Pacific. These countries are excluded from from research. These countries are excluded from benefits, from knowledge, from because when research comes, research is the provider for taxes. And if no taxes come to a certain area, that area is excluded. That socioeconomic status decreases. It's spiraling into a bad environment. So, and 10% of global research output comes from low-income countries. And that is 84% of the world's population, which is completely a skewed distribution. And 80% of clinical trials are conducted in high-income countries, which means that underserved communities are understudied. I recently did a study on this in which I found that 99% of studies, and this was for a clinical guideline, which means it's used all around the world, and 99% of the studies was conducted either in the US or in Western Europe. And that is just completely like, it blows my mind. Because the most populous countries are in Asia and zero studies were conducted there. Africa, which has 53 countries, zero studies were conducted there. This Declaration of Independence promises that we have equal access to everything, equal access to research. Everyone gets this. Yet, it's only considering the US and it leaves all these other countries left to dry. So, who gets to ask the questions? Well, research shapes everything. Like I said, with taxes, it shapes policy, funding priorities, and public understanding of the world. So when underserved communities don't get access to this research, their questions go unanswered, like forever. And life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is really non-existent if the knowledge creation is gatekept. And the Declaration built political freedom, and it never dismantled intellectual barriers. So knowledge is power, and gatekeeping knowledge is gatekeeping freedom. Research is a gateway to freedom. So now I want to introduce an organization that I am part of and that I especially love. So this is an organization that essentially democratizes research access, which is excellent. It's just the entire goal of humanity is to make my goal is to make research accessible. That's the goal of the Declaration of Independence. That's the premise in which we are supposed to set ourselves in an equal society. And yet we are not. But this organization aims to promote that premise of an equal society. We were just founded last year and we've grown to over 16,700 student researchers, and that is across 98 countries. We have also partnered with NAEIF, which is the organization hosting this Congress. So thank you to Mr. Ted Wills for letting me speak here. And it's all online. So the thing is, when people think of research, they think of scientists in lab coats and with like test tubes and beakers and mixing potions and stuff. No, that's not research. Research is much more. Research can be systematic reviews. Research can be meta-analyses. Research is more than just a lab. So this aims to promote that. We're now hosting webinars all across Africa. We have actually later today we have a research weekend which we're hosting in Rwanda with people there. I'm actually going to be participating in hosting webinars in Kenya. We're going to be spreading mental awareness over there. We're actually hosting webinars in the UAE and across the Middle East as well too, because research and knowledge is nothing if it's not distributed. Research is a civil right. Everyone needs to have access to research. Everyone needs to have access to knowledge. Freedom isn't just freedom from oppression. It's freedom to create, discover, and contribute to human knowledge. So the Declaration of Independence defined rights only for the wealthy and elite. Our generation is responsible for extending them to everyone. Everyone deserves access to research. Everyone deserves access to knowledge. And this is the unfinished work, because you have to do this so society becomes together. We are one. We have access to research. We have access to knowledge. You have to support platforms that give underserved students a real path into research. Demand institutions measure like who they include, not just what they discover. I actually worked with MIT on this study, and we were looking at these AI courses. And the thing is, these courses, they are not explanatory of any countries other than the US or Western Europe. These courses that are supposed to teach everyone about how the world is, how AI works, only applies to a select few countries. And that is coming from one of the greatest institutions in the world, MIT. Like, that doesn't make sense. So join organizations such as NSRI or similar research organizations, and let's make research a global conversation. We have to ensure that every student everywhere can pursue knowledge. So I would like to thank you all for listening. And the declaration was never meant to be the finish line. It was meant to be the starting point in which we establish a premise, and now we have to build off of it so everyone has access to the pursuit of happiness and the pursuit of knowledge. So thank you all.
Thank you, Smia. That was a different take on this topic, but one that has a practical aspect to it and one that's very original. Sergio, would you like to give us your presentation at this time, and please introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. And just let me share my presentation. Could you see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you, Ted, for this space, and let me speak at this time. This is a pretty good exercise for share this knowledge. And at this time, I will start the presentation saying that ontologically, we have a contradiction, or like Hegel says, a dialectic interaction, because we have in one hand, the intention from equality, and in other hand, economic system that um, makes the difference or embrace the difference. So in these words, we can say that it's a imperfect blueprint because sorry, I am a little coffee. Often we view the American Revolution through a narrow patriotic lens, but today we adopt an hemispheric perspective to understand the deep contradictions and eventual triumphs of 1776. We will explore how a group of flawed architects, while protecting their own interests, inadvertently draft a universal vocabulary for human liberation. This is the story of how a document designed for the few became a weapon for many. To understand this story, we must first see the myth of the flawless monument. An critical view demands that we see the founders as perfect, a narrative that hides the messy reality of colonial class struggles, economic self-interest, and radical hierarchy. However, a critical view reveals something more interesting. 1776 as a living blueprint. The architects were undoubtedly compromised, but they designed a foundation so structurally sound that subsequent generations could build upon it in a ways the founders never intend. Like I said, the dialectic interaction. Let's look at the reality check of that famous stated ideal. All men are created equal. In 1776, this equality was highly selective. White propertied men were the only ones granted immediate political rights. Meanwhile, slave Black Americans were denied their basic human to support a Southern economy reliant on their labor. Thomas Jefferson, the primary author of these words, enslaved like 260 people himself. Native Americans were characterized in the Declaration as merciless Indian savages to justify the seizure of their lands. And that's why my question about the universal human rights, because, like I said before, some people are more equals than others, and women were entirely omitted from the code of laws, despite the direct and famous plea from Abigail Adams to her husband to remember the ladies. The blueprint was even more radical in its early drafts, but it was butchered by a dark political bargain. Jefferson originally drafted a clause of 168 words that condemned King George III for the transatlantic slave trade, calling it a cruel war against human nature itself and an execrable commerce. This clause was vetoed and struck out entirely to appease delegates from South Carolina and Georgia, who demand the continued importation of enslaved people. This hypocrisy didn't go unnoticed at the time. British essayist Samuel Johnson famously asked in 1776 how it is we hear the loudest yelps for liberty among the drivers of Negroes. The exclusion of women was also a conscientious choice, not just a product of the times. In June 1776, John Dickinson drafted the first national constitution, which originally granted the religious freedom to his or her person. This proves that the intellectual capacity for gender inclusion existed within the room. However, during the redaction process, this progressive protection was quietly edited out. This step two of the drafting process effectively delayed constitutional gender recognition for generations, ignoring the urgent pleas of figures like Abigail Adams. We must also recognize how the blueprint was weaponized against indigenous population. The declaration includes a specific grievance accusing the king of unleashing merciless Indian savages against the colonists. This wasn't just a slur, it had political utility. By lumping diverse, complex Native American nations, some of whom were actually neutral or even British aligned, into a single dehumanized category. The architects created a moral justification for laying waste to indigenous settlements and seizing their homelands. So, how do we reconcile this? We must use a hemispheric lens to see synthesis pivot. Like Mexico and South America, the US was born in a complex web of colonial economics and racial hierarchies. The architects were aristocrats protecting their interests. However, to gain essential French and Spanish support, they grounded their rebellion in natural law and self-evident truths. This was an accident universalism. While the context was about protecting property and securing independence for elites, the text itself became a weapon for universal human rights. This created what we call the ideal feedback loop. It begins with white colonial elites drafting universal language to justify their own separation from Britain. That language is used to exclude Black Americans, women, and Native Americans in the short term. But then the co-optation begins. Marginalized groups begin using the founders' exact words against them. For example, in 1791, the free Black intellectual Benjamin Weinberger quoted the Declaration back to Jefferson to demand accountability. This cycle forced the nation to slowly expand the definition of "we the people," aligning reality with its stated ideals. The blueprint didn't stop at the US border, it created a global echo. In 1790, Flanders issued a manifesto drawing directly from the Declaration's translation. In 1811, Venezuela declares themselves free, sovereign, and independent states. Well, 1 year before, Mexico makes the same thing, declaring themselves free, sovereign, and independent states. In the end, we must weigh the 1776 reality. The slavery compromises the indigenous displacement and the gender exclusion against the philosophical triumph. And students of history, we must look critically at the architects. But as citizens of the Americas, we can celebrate the blueprint. The genius of 1776 is not that founders were perfect, but they wrote a promise larger than themselves, and promise that eventually liberate the world. And I want to end with a question, and it's, we can say that it's a real independence without liberty? Thank you.
Sergio, great graphics. Great job. And
Thank you.
let's see if we have questions. Is Patrick still in the meeting? I know Patrick wanted to ask a question. Patrick Obama? Anybody else in the group wanted to ask a question for Sergio? Well, it is now 2:00, and we are very grateful for your participation in the 5th Virtual North American Student Congress sponsored by the North American Educational Initiatives Foundation. We will have our next Congress in the middle of August. And I will be sending you proposed topics for that Congress, and I want you to think about what the Congress could be about. Sergio, Konstantinos is telling you that you did a great job. So we want to thank everyone. We will be inviting you to join our student steering committee. We're sorry, Luis, that your speaker wasn't working. And we will also, if you have a LinkedIn profile, I would be happy to write a recommendation for you. And if you do not have one, I will write one anyway to your email on my stationery. Thank you, everybody, for participating. We will have this video available on our website very soon. Take care.